Hello, this is just a short little video to get you thinking about threshold concepts in the BITHM program. What is a threshold concept? Why are they important? And who decides what the threshold concepts are and when are they going to be taught in our program? Let me paint a picture that I'm sure you can all relate to. I often find myself wondering how a student can not know something that to me is so obvious and basic that I can't imagine what it's like to not understand it. So a threshold concept is like a doorway to knowledge, that once you've stepped over that threshold, you can never go back to ignorance. So once the student has moved over the threshold, they see things differently. Their worldview has changed, and they couldn't possibly have moved forward on their learning pilgrimage without crossing this threshold. And that pretty much sums up the characteristics of threshold concepts. They change the learner, they challenge the learner, and they are permanent. Let's think about some key concepts in a discipline that is not ours. I'm sure you've all heard of the periodic table of elements, even if we don't all know that hydrogen is the first element. But to really grasp the key concept of the periodic table, you first need to understand the threshold concepts of atoms, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Now let's think of some basic examples in some fields that are closer to home. In hotel management, you have to understand the concept of RevPAR. In tourism, it is important to understand what motivates tourists. But to be able to understand RevPAR, you first need to understand the threshold concepts of average daily rate and occupancy rate. Similarly, before you can understand tourist motivations, you first have to define what is a tourist. So, who decides on the threshold concepts for our BITHM program? Well, we can look externally. For example, national learning standards. There was an Office of Learning and Teaching grant recently that looked at threshold learning outcomes for tourism, event and hospitality higher education in Australia. The AQTF program learning outcomes are like a roadmap of where we need to get to. So that can actually help us decide the steps along the way. We can engage with industry and see what their opinions are, and we can review internationally recognized research as well. But at the end of the day, we need to agree amongst all of our disciplines what our threshold concepts are. And that consensus, that agreement, that relates to an interesting discussion board thread about scaffolding that is on the THSM program development site. Everyone who's contributed to this discussion thread agrees that consensus is needed. But they also agree that existing systems within the university actively discourage the process of reaching consensus or even having a discussion about what these things might be. And this is where our fledgling BITHM program development site comes in. It will enable us to engage in these conversations, to record these conversations, to make decisions as a result of these conversations, and then action things as a result of these conversations. And that pretty much wraps it up for this little video. We just wanted to plant some seeds about threshold concepts so that as we move forwards, we can actually engage in a discussion about what these threshold concepts are for our program and where they need to be embedded.